So this is AutoTech Effect 2020 at NADA here in Las Vegas. I'm about to speak with Eddie Alterman, a former editor-in-chief of Car and Driver and now chief brand officer for Hearst Autos. Well, Eddie, thanks for coming. It's
Thanks,
quite
John.
an honor to have you here at the AutoTech Effect. We love speaking to people with like visionaries and people who are leading the space, such as yourself. It is a pleasure. So let's just jump right into it. As you and I were talking earlier in the day, I mean, the consumer and how they're engaging with media and how they're searching for vehicles is changing dramatically. I mean, just in the last few years, there was a time when I said every car in America started and stopped with an aggregation site. I don't believe that's true anymore, and I guarantee you don't think so either. So why don't you talk a little bit about how that's changed, the buying and the shopping patterns of that's changed, and what you guys are doing at Hearst to focus on the consumer?
Well, it's a great question. Thanks for having me, John. It's great to be here. A lot of the changes that are happening on the consumer side are an effect of the vehicles themselves. You know, we've seen this huge revolution in automotive from a very hardware-based business to a blended hardware and software-based business. And I think as a result of that, consumers, not only do they have more choice in terms of what they buy and how they buy it and what the terms are, you know, we saw that kind of move away from like a pure ownership model with the advent of leasing, and now you have subscription services and all this stuff. But the vehicles themselves are so laden with technology and they have so much stuff in them that people shop by attribute now in a really, really powerful way. So instead of saying, wow, I really want the new Chevy Caprice that they don't make anymore, because you know it has that V8 engine, people are saying, what can I get for $400 that has a panoramic sunroof, Apple CarPlay, and you know, captain's chairs? And so as a response to that, our pivot to the consumer has involved, at least at Car and Driver, and I can talk about some of our other brands, but at Car and Driver, we've expanded our testing so dramatically from 16 kind of parameters that were all dynamic, 0 to 60 time, how much grip does it have, how does it brake, to over 216 parameters that are testing for, does a stroller fit in the back? How many USB ports are there in the vehicle? What's the infotainment response time? All the things that are kind of, you don't think about them as major things, but they really are make or break when somebody is thinking about a car on a test drive or their subsequent car. You know, the annoyances that people have to put up with as a result of all these new features in the car is something that car makers have to mitigate, and it's something that we have to report on.
That's very interesting. This is the first time I've ever heard somebody frame it that way. So you're saying that consumers now are more focused, like when I was selling cars, I used to focus on, you know, does the car meet your needs? Let's talk about features and functionality, then we get to price.
Yeah.
So you're saying that consumers now are more focused on features and functionalities when they're searching for vehicles, attributes, as you said, versus, okay, let me start with a Honda and then see what I can afford.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's so much transparency now in media that we want to be a part of that, and we want to lead that and give the consumer as much transparency as possible in every aspect of the deal. And that starts with the product, really showing people every nook and cranny of a vehicle so that they know when they're up funnel what they're going to get at the dealership, and also the right questions to ask. And you know, pricing is also a big part of that. But you know, the brand loyalty has been really disrupted. You see, Tesla's a great disruptor of brand loyalty,
Sure. Yeah.
taking a lot of sales away from traditional luxury brands. Kia, Hyundai have done a great job of even disrupting the Japanese and had a really entrenched position in value. So it's really interesting.
You know, I wonder if the manufacturers have kind of adopted your stance on this shopping change, if you're the paradigm shift here, because before it was always like, hey, you should go buy a Toyota, go on AutoTrader and look for a Toyota or another aggregator site, not to solo them out. But so now with this features and functionalities, I wonder if that's driving all the innovation that we're seeing from the manufacturers. Because I remember just a few years ago, people would say, oh, we'll never have an electric truck. Well, we already know where we're going with this,
Exactly.
right? So I wonder if those people, because I know consumers they have the desire to drive an EV vehicle.
Yeah.
That's been coming apparent over the last couple of years. And that's what's driving all these manufacturers. I never thought that Chevrolet would have an electric truck, but obviously, if consumers are focused on features and functionalities and wants and needs now, where would be better for the environment, socially responsible, whatever the movement is at the moment, if that's what's driving all this innovation, it's a really good take.
And it's also a bit of a faddish. There's a faddish element of EVs. Now they're only 3% of the market at this point, and a lot of that's driven by Tesla. You know, like I saw a statistic that said EVs are 2% of the market, or Tesla's 2% of the market, but in Palo Alto it's almost 40%.
Yeah.
You
So
know?
it's that. I like Teslas. I have somebody in the family who has a Tesla. I don't drive one myself, but it is amazing what they've done.
It is.
Yeah,
it's
and I think they're
American
winning in a
company.
lot of different ways, right? I think that they're winning because they're obviously amassing a lot of data and understanding consumer behavior and being able to identify more customers. But to tell you the truth, if you listen to Ilion, he says he spends zero money on advertising. And I don't really believe that he spends zero money on advertising. They probably call it something else,
Right.
consumer R&D or something like that. But it is amazing what they've done. Now, let me ask you this. So if you've kind of diagnosed this and expanded your feature set on Car and Driver to include all these attributes, are you guys then sharing that information back to manufacturers? Or are you just kind of solely focused on, okay, how do we get our media mix right to engage more consumers? What are you doing with the data?
The consumer is obviously a big piece of where we take our data and how we inform them and how we demystify the car market for them. But OEs are just as mystified in some respects. Part of that is just the tunnel vision that comes from working on one brand, and they don't have the same exposure to the other brands that like a media property like we do has. I mean, we test in depth 400 cars a year. We have incredible exposure to all these vehicles. OEs want that information because they don't want to buy all the vehicles. They don't want to, have to tear them down. There are tear down services. We provide something a little bit different, but OEs are another of our customers.
When on your publications, if I'm not mistaken, you actually get consumer feedback on your publications, right?
Yeah.
So you share that information with the manufacturer as well. Like, if sometimes if you have an expert, he breaks down a car, he drives it, his opinion might be completely different than somebody who uses a car every day for a longer period of time, right? That's great that you have that information. So if I'm a consumer and I engage with a Hearst property, what am I typically doing? Walk me through what a consumer does on one of your properties, and what step are they engaging with you in the buying process?
Well, that's changing as well. Media. What's so fascinating about my job is that I'm in the middle of a radical transformation of the car business, from brands and owned to attributes and shared, and a huge transformation in the media business, where we're going from kind of an owned, earned, and shared model to an owned and shared model. And the traditional ad process is changing, and consumers are more selective about what they consume. They're consuming more, but they're doing it differently. And to get in that mix and to be really important to a media consumer, you have to do things right. You have to speak truthfully and honestly and give them the right information at the right time. So when we think about the Hearst Autos portfolio, Car and Driver, Road and Track, and AutoWeek, some things are very top funnel awareness type stuff, and some of the stuff is just very nitty gritty in market information. And the goal of our media mix is to provide the right thing at the right time, and that's really what we're trying to do with Car and Driver, and as well as Road and Track and AutoWeek. And what is also interesting about media is, because the ad scenario has changed so much, especially around print, and even to a large extent around digital, because you have such dominance by the platforms, that the traditional way of acquiring a consumer and serving the consumer through a very robust circulation department that created these huge rate bases for these magazines and huge audiences for these magazines, that's sort of falling away because it's not supported by advertising. So what we're doing is winnowing down some of the products to the core audience of enthusiasts, like for Road and Track, the core audience for enthusiasts who really want a premium product. We're launching a product called R&T to support the main Road and Track brand. for people who want, a 200-page magazine that's really in depth. It's really for the super enthusiast. And we're going to charge them for it. And we're not going to be as heavily reliant on advertising because we know this is a really elite group of consumers and really know their stuff about cars. And it's going to be such a great audience that the advertisers would want to be a part of it. Instead of the tail wagging the dog where it's like, oh, let's get a huge circ and then we'll get a high page rate for advertising. This is a lot more targeted, but I think much more effective and also really feeds the enthusiast need for road and track. And in a different way, through different means, we're trying to do that for car and driver and for shoppers to really feed the kind of desire for knowledge about the car. One of the things that we found out that's so fascinating is that regular car shoppers act like enthusiasts when they're on the car and driver make model pages. They want to go so deep, they want to get as much information as they possibly can so that when they go into the dealership, it's just to do the deal. They know exactly what they want. And they're not going to be sold something that they didn't plan on. And so it's all about empowering the consumer, giving them what they want, doing it in different ways, and finding and expanding that consumer kind of portfolio that we have.
Nice. So it sounds like you guys are spending a lot of time on identifying the right consumer and the right media mix through content.
Yes.
Right? So I wouldn't want to use the word native, but you want to make the content where it's almost intrinsic or relevant to what they're searching for. Maybe it's a purchase in the future, or maybe an immediate purchase, or maybe it's a second car, an enthusiast type car. So you're generating a great audience, right? So audience generation to me is very important when you're dealing with media and you're trying to build an advertising budget on what a lot of times these tier 3 dealers and retailers have is a small budget. So what do you think is the ideal customer or endpoint for engaging with Hearst? Is it the local dealer? Is it John Lamb Chevrolet? Or are you more focused on tier 2, tier 1? What's your ideal mix?
We want to be full funnel from somebody's idea or the inspiration to get a car right into the seat of it. And when I would talk about earlier, meeting the consumer where they are, that's a big piece of it. So for car dealers, for example, we have a product where we syndicate some of our assets and badges and light editorial that allows people to have some of the car and driver experience on a VDP. And it builds confidence, third-party validation around a given make model. So that's one way to interact with the brand. Another way is, you grew up reading Car and Driver, so you want to read the magazine. The other is, hey, I'm looking for a Buick Enclave. Let me type that into Google. Well, luckily our SEO, or not luckily, we worked really hard on it, but our SEO is so good that that's going to be the first result, and that gets you into our ecosystem.
Nice. So what do you think, if you had to provide an outline of automotive, not just retail, but from a technology space, it could be shared ownership, could be autonomous. We talked a little bit about that off camera. The next 5 years, where do you see it going? Where do you see companies, large publishers like Hearst with their deterministic platforms, and maybe even touch on some aggregators, because I know you're familiar with that, but what do you see the next 5 years? Where do you see Hearst? Where do you see us going?
Corporations, both on the automotive side and the media side, have to get really nimble and have to really be flexible. I once asked a buddy of mine who works at General Motors how many car segments there are. And he said 17 million in the new car space, because everybody has different motivation.
Sure.
So it's very hard to create products at a mass scale for the individual, but that should be sort of how it feels. And you can use AI. I mean, Spotify is a great example. It's this massive platform for music, but it kind of knows what you want. And it allows you to kind of choose your own adventure through the platform.
I think if manufacturers really could leverage that in the shopping experience, right? I think an individual feel like the car is being manufactured for them, as you just said, right? So if I can get down to attribute shopping where I wanted tan leather with this and that, and then focus in on my payment, then select a make and model, because at this point, I think consumers have a lot of confidence in all make and models. I mean, I
Yeah.
think manufacturing technology has really advanced, and I think competition has brought some of the manufacturers that perhaps had some difficulties in the past with reliability, has brought them up to another level.
And that's why, as we were saying earlier, it's about attributes. Quality is table stakes. That's a baseline.
Yeah.
And you know, especially with the warranties and with leasing, quality is not quite as important. Quality and reliability is just sort of like it's a baseline. It's what you need to do to sell cars. So what's going to differentiate you? What's going to distinguish you? Is it, you know, your technology? Is it your story? Is it the heritage? And I think all of that is really important when it comes to car brands and launching car brands. And you see how crazy people got when we said there's going to be an electric Mustang and it's going to be an SUV. People are like, oh my God, you know, but that's what Mustang needs to do to create a brand around the icon of the coupe. And that's what Ford needs to do. So I think a lot of experimentation is going to happen in the next 5-10 years. But I also think when you look beyond that, it gets even crazier. You know, if we say, you know, in 20-25 years, the bulk of people's transportation needs will be solved by apps like Uber and Lyft, level 4, level 5 autonomous cars, however those deploy and play out. But the people who really don't care about cars as an avatar for their personality, they're just going to use transportation solutions, almost like private public, like small scale public transportation. That leaves the other 20% who really do care about cars. Now, what happens there? Those are the people who are going to be owning cars and collecting them and driving them. And I think that gets really, really interesting. You'll have a bifurcated market that some's just commodity, but the rest is like pure enthusiast. And that, to me, as an enthusiast, is really exciting.
Do you see where, given your prognostication, let's say you're Ford or you're another OEM, and we see them partnering and starting companies like Rivian and all these other manufacturing spin-offs, if you will. Do you see a time when maybe Ford has 1 or 2 cars to their nameplate, but they're either involved in partnerships with rideshare companies like Uber to manufacture cars specific for basic transportation needs? So imagine a manufacturer like Ford building a $5,000 EV car that's just used for Uber in metro areas.
I
think that's the future, right? I mean, what do you think?
I do, and I think that you can get a flywheel around the more emotional brands. But when you break it down, what does Ford really have that's emotional? It's not Escape, it's not EcoSport, it's F-150 and it's Mustang. And those are the enthusiast vehicles in the brand. The rest, maybe Ford is the manufacturer for Uber itself, like you said. So it gets really, really fascinating. But what is, I think, key is that each brand have some sort of enthusiast icon and not turn into just a sea of beige. You know, there has to be something. I think Toyota had a great response to the past 20 years where they built great cars, but everybody started building great cars.
Yep.
And their dominance as the most reliable, highest quality was really challenged. So Akio Toyota said, we need a Supra. We need something with excitement. And that's what gives your brand its life. And we might be at a time when all Toyota makes for sale is something like a Supra or a Celica or a BRZ or, a 86. And then the rest of it is commodity. But maybe that's 30, 40 years out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make fun of Camry drivers, but I mean, a Camry driver, I've owned a Camry. I mean, Camry driver is A to B, right?
Right.
There's not a lot of enthusiasm there. It's an interesting take, and I happen to agree with you. I think manufacturers are going to evolve. I think we're going to see a lot of cars that are on the road today not be around. There might be some badging around in the future, but I think the way that we look at cars, Camry, Corolla, Accord, Civic, I think it's going to change dramatically. I remember when I was growing up, there was a time when if you drove a Nissan Maxima, you made all the money in the world,
Exactly.
Right? Now,
it's the four-door sports car.
it's a 4-door sports car. Or if a Civic was considered a nice family car, you had made it in life when you had a Civic. But now I think people look at those cars as first entry-level cars, and then you can argue back and forth if people are going to start buying cars that way anymore, saving up to get your first car. So I think manufacturers are going to have to adjust. It sounds like you guys are adjusting to the new consumer and how they shop. And I want to thank you for sharing all that with us and having you here today. This is a good chance for us to sit down and speak with people like yourself, unbiased, unscripted, where we can just hear about it, no plugs or anything like that. We really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to be here.
All right, thanks.